Today we are going to grade each of the drafts for the AFC North football team. So the Steelers, the Bengals, the Browns, and the Baltimore Ravens. Each of these teams, as we know, are in a black and blue division cemented by the elite quarterbacks of Lamar Jackson and, of course, Joe Burrow. So the theme that I really saw from this was they were going again with some flyer picks with guys that had certain traits that they wanted to take. And we're also really trying to harp on the defensive line. A lot of Big Ten players selected out of these schools. To start it off, we're going to get right into the Baltimore Ravens. But before I do that, please make sure to subscribe for more college and NFL football content coming at you. Now, the Baltimore Ravens, honestly, I thought that this was a very good draft for them. You know, they had a late round pick, and oftentimes when you have a very good season, it's tough to get the best draft capital for your team. But is there a better fit for them than Malachi Starks at pick 27? Pairing him with Kyle Hamilton, they are going to have one of the best safety duos in the National Football League. This is a come down and make plays type of player, being a starter with the Georgia Bulldogs for a couple of seasons. We know how good those defenders are. One of the steals of the draft, number 59 overall, Mike Green, taking the leading sack player in college football from last season with 17 out of Marshall. Again, traits are there, production is there, and him sliding all the way to the second because of the off-the-field stuff a couple of years ago with Virginia. Intense amount of value with those two picks. They took an interesting one in the third round when they decided to go with Emory Jones. Look, Emory played a whole bunch of right tackle with LSU on the opposite side of Will Campbell with that very good offensive line at LSU, but there really isn't an opening on pretty much the entire Baltimore Ravens starting offense except at left guard. So are they going to have him compete for that position? Absolutely. And will he find a potential role in that offense playing position that he is not as familiar with? So Teddy Buchanan, their fourth round pick out of Cal, and the number one thing I have written down is his highest mark for the vertical jump at the NFL Combine. Again, you were talking about the Baltimore Ravens, so is he going to have an opportunity to start on the opposite side of that linebacking core with Roquan Smith? So they were absolutely looking at athleticism. We know Patrick Queen and previously been there. We know all about the history of Terrell Suggs, outside linebacker, and Ray Lewis. So being a linebacker for that team is no small task. Carson Vincent, so this was the only HBCU, historically a black college, right, that had been invited to the NFL Combine as well as to the Senior Bowl. So them taking him, another depth player for the offensive line, for Vincent to be able to try and make the 53-man roster. Likely he can do that. Wasn't as familiar with Bilal Cohn, who they took out of Western Michigan. Just based off of what we've heard here, last year was production, and he was able to, have, I think, close to 70 tackles and a takeaway. So competing for defensive back role. Huge news where they took Justin Tucker's replacement out of Tyler Loop, the kicker out of Arizona. One of my favorite players in this draft, LeJontay Wester, watched a whole lot of Colorado football the last couple of seasons, and the number one thing is just quickness. I mean, this guy will run right by you. He had a whole bunch of good return statistics that you can look at. He's going to be productive right away in a returning role if they are going to be able to give him that position. And then he adds a depth of vertical threat ability for that offense. I want to just highlight them going with Virginia Tech. Remember that team was in a whole bunch of tight football games. So in ESP Bowls, so they took, right, 25 pressures, tied for the most among ACC defensive tackles. So him falling into the 6th round, do like that pick. So overall, I give Baltimore Ravens an A. Look, with a late round selection in the first and the second, as well as getting some very good pieces later on in the draft, I think that they hit an absolute home run with what they were able to get. 2 starters on defense likely, and then depth pieces that are going to be very good players for their team. Secondly, another very good draft team, the Cleveland Browns. How often do we get to say that the Cleveland Browns had a very good draft? Look, this thing could turn out to be a grand slam if, let's say, Jacksonville doesn't have a good season and they get a high first-round pick from the Jaguars. But they got what I had as the third best player in the draft, Mason Graham, at pick number 5, Plus, they were able to stack Quinshon Judkins at pick number 36. Could be the second best running back in this draft if he went to anywhere else but Ohio State, splitting carries with the 38th pick in this back, Travion Henderson. So them competing for playing time made each other better because they're a little bit fresher, but also gave them less carries. So the numbers weren't going to be as high as, let's say, Marion Hampton, especially in Ashton Denty. And then 33, where they were able to take the absolute tackle machine that is Carson Schwarzenegger out of UCLA. This was, a surprise. Again, thought that they would go with Shedeur, who they ended up getting later on. We'll talk about him in a second. But they did need David Njoku, knowing about how good he is at tight end. So Harold Fannin from Bowling Green ends up going to the Cleveland Browns. They add another piece to that offense, receiving targets. And then later on in the third, they were able to take Dylan Gabriel out of Oregon. Really fell in love with his just nature as a quarterback, to be consistent, to go with easy throws. Was a little bit worried about him early in the season. He had 2 interceptions in the red zone. Just remembering Michigan State off the top of my head, but ended up having a tremendous year. They were the best team in college football throughout the regular season, 13-0, until they ran into the buzzsaw Death Star that is the Ohio State Buckeyes. The curious pick in this draft for me was the 4th rounder, Dylan Sampson. At the back end of it, was too bad that he didn't get to play, because that was, an All-American, like a best player at the running back spot. I might have thought to be one of the best runners in the SEC last year, who unfortunately didn't get to play much against Ohio State when they faced off in the college football playoff first round. And so with Judkins, it was curious for them to go with that pick. But look, they're trying to make that position competitive and, again, build depth. So the 5th rounder, they got some of their best value, getting Shedeur Sanders with the 5th. So him, Dylan Gabriel, Kenny Pickett, Joe Flacco are all going to be given their best for competing for that starting quarterback spot. Some people had Shedeur Sanders. I've talked about it being a top 20 prospect in this draft. Look, he led college football in completion percentage in 2024 with 74% over the likes of Will Howard. And he had the 5th most attempts at the quarterback position. So the percentage is high, still pairing that with the amount of attempts. So if you're saying the Browns did not get a whole lot of value, then you're kidding yourself. Cleveland, that's an A. This thing could turn into an A+, depends on what their first rounder will turn into in the future. Now, into the Pittsburgh Steelers, one of the really emotional moments of any story of the first round was Derek Harmon being picked 21st overall. He gets drafted by Pittsburgh and drives to go see his mom in the hospital, who passes away a little bit later that evening. I mean, that just gets you just immediately just thinking about him, and prayers obviously with him and that family. That is an incredible thing. He was able to tell his mom, but obviously very sad. He had gone to Michigan State to be closer to her and transferred to Oregon, which turned out to be a decision where he was one of the best defensive players on one of the best defenses in the country with Oregon. Tauyungalele was there. Jeffrey Boss, another drafted player, was on that defense. They had a dynamic defense, and he was one of the key contributors. Caleb Johnson in the 3rd round out of Iowa, he perfect comparable is Najee Harris in terms of the size, the strength, the speed. Huge producer in the Big Ten the last couple of seasons. He'll be splitting reps, obviously, with Jalen Warren and Gainwell. So, they went for a running back there. Jack Sawyer out of Ohio State, right? He's going to have a great opportunity to learn from TJ Watt, who I think is the best defensive player in the NFL. I know Myles Garrett fans or fans of the Browns are going to have something to say about that. But Jack Sawyer in the 4th round, they got value. He had a ridiculous college football playoff. Didn't produce the way some people might say for Ohio State, have to say that, of what they thought he would be as a 5-star, but in his last season, he sure delivered. Yaya Black, the nose tackle, Iowa. We keep going with the Big Ten. This thing just rattles off Big Ten players, but if you're producing on that Iowa, which we know always has good run defense, always has a good secondary. So being a nose tackle there for a nose, and obviously learning from Cam Hayward, potential is immediately going to make him better. 6th rounder, Will Howard. You're not going to get a guy that loves football more than Will, someone that has been written off for years, battling, and they bring in Avery Johnson to replace him at quarterback. He transfers to the Ohio State Buckeyes, wins the starting role, and leads them, into some choppy waters, losing to Oregon, losing to Michigan, but then an eventual superstar performance throughout the college football playoff. So we'll see what they do with their quarterbacks there. If they bring in a veteran, that's what's expected. And Aaron Rodgers to be there, but Will be there competing, learning, and has a chance to eventually be a good player for Pittsburgh. And then Carson Bruner, a very cool story where his dad, had been a tight end in the league, was drafted by them 30 years ago and spent 9 Steelers with Pittsburgh. So they were together when he was able to be drafted. So, all those players from the Big Ten. I overall give Pittsburgh a B. No, it's very difficult for them to be able to compete with the likes of Baltimore or Cleveland teams without having a second round pick, having that 3rd rounder go with Caleb Johnson later on in the draft. You're competing against a little bit more capital, so that's why it's a bit more difficult and why I give Pittsburgh a B overall. And then finally, Cincinnati, the 4th team for the North to go over here. They went fully traits with Shedeur Sanders. He is a freak athletically. He's got the size, the speed, the strength, everything you need. It's just a matter of production. 4.5 sacks in his career with Texas A&M. So looking back on this, you could miss. He just might not have the nose for the football to be able to get after it and make plays. Or is he going to get better? And I think what's key to this whole thing is Trey Hendrickson staying with Cincinnati and him being able to learn from Trey as much as he can. 2nd round, they really went with the linebacker. That South Carolina defense was fantastic last year. Again, a lot of that had to do with how good they were up front in South Carolina. But they took Demetrius Knight, the linebacker, a rangy guy. So immediately they're going to be expecting him to fill into a starting role in Cincinnati. And I think that he can do that. They went with They went with a Georgia interior offensive lineman in Fairchild. There still were a heck of a lot of Georgia Bulldogs taken in this draft, although people call it a very much down year for them. So they bring him in. They took Barrett Carter out of Clemson. I've heard a whole lot about this kid the last several years being a good off-ball linebacker, which has been one of the least valuable positions in the NFL draft over the last couple of years. And then Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech, the running back. So don't know exactly that running back situation, if it's not the strongest, but bringing him in to compete with Moss and Samaje Perine. So overall, I give Cincinnati, again, limited draft capital. Going to give them a B- overall with what they did. It's all going to depend on Shedeur Sanders. So maybe it's me being a little bit critical here with the traits type of selections because we just don't know what it will be. But again, it could end up turning into an A. It just depends on what Shedeur develops into. So overall, we had an A, Baltimore Ravens, A for the Cleveland Browns, could be an A+, and we had a B for Pittsburgh and a B- for the Cincinnati Bengals. Let me know in the comments what you think of my grades for these teams drafting very well. They are going to be a very tough division next season. It's going to be even tougher now every single year as Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow get more advanced and continue to play elite, top of the league, top 5 level football. And so, yeah, that's the exact reason why you take a Shedeur Sanders. Is a guy that can track down Lamar Jackson. So let me know in the comments what you think. And if you have not already, make sure to subscribe for more college football, more NFL content coming at you in the future. Thank you for watching Blitz with Blender, and we will catch you next time.